if I play you a recording of a dog barking, your brain does something completely effortless and automatic.
Oh, yeah. Instantly.
Right. You instantly picture a dog. You imagine the physical space it occupies, like the size of its chest, based on how deep the bark is.
You're constructing the whole biological reality of the animal right there in your mind's eye.
Exactly. But I want to propose a pretty radical thought experiment for you. What if you could hear that exact same bark, but entirely, kill the dog in your mind?
Just erase the source completely.
Yeah. Keep the bark, but turn that sound into a physical, malleable object. What if that complex vibration of air became a standalone entity, something you could pick up, stretch out, mold like clay, and paint with, completely divorced from the animal that made it?
I mean, it is a deeply unnatural concept to wrap your head around. It runs entirely counter to the fundamental way human beings have evolved to process acoustic information.
Right, because of survival, right.
Exactly. We are biologically hardwired to trace every single sound back to its physical source. It's a survival mechanism. If we hear a rustle in the bushes, we absolutely need to know what caused it.
Is it the wind, or is it a tiger?
Right. But breaking that causal link, learning to sever the sound from its physical source, is the exact conceptual leap you need to understand the entire landscape of modern audio.
And guiding you through that conceptual leap is, well, that's the mission of this deep dive today.
It's a big one.
It is. We are going back to explore how a single radio engineer working in Paris in 1948 completely shattered the definition of what a musical instrument could be.
It's wild to think about.
We're pulling from a huge stack of sources here. Textbooks like The Language of New Media, histories of sonic art, like Listening to Noise and Silence and Noise Watermead, plus the original writings of the guy who started it all, Pierre Schaeffer.
Yeah, his own foundational treatises are key here.
Because this is the story of how a seemingly obscure, philosophical and technical experiment literally burst the DNA of the modern music production landscape you interact with every single day.
We're talking the foundation of everything. Minimal techno, hip-hop, the highly textured pop music dominating the charts right now.
Yeah. We're going to trace the post-World War II invention of music concrete, decode this radical concept of the sound object, revive the ancient philosophy of acousmatic listening.
Which is fascinating all on its own.
Oh, totally. And we'll uncover how an engineer's profound sense of personal failure secretly built the architecture of modern sampling. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand, like, a teenager making beats on a laptop in their bedroom today, we have to travel back to the exact room where the traditional rules of Western music were torn to shreds. Paris, 1948.
Yeah, the historical and cultural climate of 1948 is really the necessary starting point here. You just cannot separate this audio revolution from the broader post-World War II context.
The world had just been through hell.
Unimaginable devastation. And across multiple artistic disciplines, there was this desperate search for a new language. The old systems had completely failed.
Yeah.
In the visual arts, 1948 is the year Willem de Kooning held his watershed solo show that fundamentally established abstract expressionism as the dominant force in painting.
So representation was out.
Right. Painting a bowl of fruit or a landscape so that it looks exactly like a bowl of fruit or a landscape that was being actively dismantled.
And over in the audio realm, the same thing was happening, right?
Yes. At the Office de Radiodiffusion Télévision Française in Paris, basically the French National Broadcasting Network, a radio engineer and broadcaster named Pierre Schaeffer, was grappling with a similar desire to dismantle the old world.
But instead of paint, he's doing it with microphones and turntables and, wiring.
Exactly. And Schaeffer's background is super crucial here. He wasn't a classical composer cloistered away in some fancy conservatory.
He was an engineer.
He was an engineer. He was elbow deep in the physical technology of broadcasting, yet he was also intensely tuned into the cultural politics of music at the time.
He actually had a lot of resentment toward the musical establishment, didn't he?
Oh, a deep resentment toward the dominant avant-garde musical movements. He famously stated that while the French had liberated themselves politically from occupation, music was still under the heel of an occupying foreign power.
Wow. That is strong language.
He was talking about the music of the Vienna School. He was utterly horrified by modern 12-tone music. He was desperately searching for a way out, a path to what he actually called salvation and liberation.
To understand why he used such heavy militaristic language to describe a musical style, we really need to look at what the Second Viennese School represented.
Yeah, we are talking about figures like Arnold Schoenberg and his development of 12-tone technique or serialism.
Right. For you listening, if you're familiar with 20th century music history, serialism is basically the ultimate endpoint of musical abstraction.
It really is. Instead of composing based on emotion or traditional harmony, where certain chords naturally resolve to other chords, serialism requires the composer to organize all 12 notes of the chromatic scale into a highly specific sequence.
A tone row, right?
Exactly, a tone row. And the strict rule is you cannot repeat a single note until all the other 11 have been played.
It's like a math puzzle.
That's exactly what it is. You can play the row backward, you can invert it, but you are essentially solving complex mathematical equations rather than writing a melody.
It's a rigid intellectual prison. The composer is dealing purely in abstract mathematics. And this really highlights the fundamental paradigm shift Schaeffer initiated, right? The difference between abstract music and concrete music.
Yes, this is the core of it. For the entirety of Western music history, composition was a purely abstract process. A composer sits at a desk in total silence and writes symbols on staff paper.
One symbol dictates a specific pitch, another dictates rhythm, another dictates how loud it is.
But those ink marks on the paper, they are not sound. They are highly coded instructions. The composer then relies on an intermediary, a performer, to translate those abstract symbols into physical acoustic vibrations using a standardized instrument.
So it's basically like an architect drawing a blueprint. The architect doesn't build the house, they draw abstract lines on paper and just kind of hope the builders understand the instructions and get it right.
That's a great analogy.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. Doesn't traditional notation encompass all the possibilities of sound? I mean, we've used it for centuries.
Well, Western staff notation is an incredibly powerful technology, but it operates within a severely closed ecosystem. It only allows you to write down the parameters that the system itself actually recognizes.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So you can notate that a violinist should play a C sharp for a quarter note at a mezzo forte volume, but you cannot notate the exact microscopic scrape of the rosin on the bowstring.
Oh, I see.
Or the specific resonant frequency of the wood of that particular violin. Or the complex, chaotic noise of the initial attack when the bow hits the string.
It's too limited.
Right. Notation is basically a low-resolution map of a very high-resolution acoustic territory. Schaeffer saw that this abstract system was rendering composers completely deaf to the vast majority of the sonic universe.
Think about the difference between a programmer writing the code for a physics engine in a video game versus a physicist actually dropping a real piece of jagged metal onto a concrete floor.
Perfect comparison.
The programmer uses abstract math to simulate a rough approximation of gravity and collision. But the physicist just records the raw reality. Schaeffer didn't want to write abstract code and hand it to a violinist to simulate a sound.
He wanted to be the physicist.
Right. He wanted to get his hands dirty. He wanted to work directly with the raw, concrete matter of the sound itself. He wanted to ditch the intermediary completely.
And the orchestra, for all its power and its versatility, was really just another intermediary that Schaeffer felt limited by. I mean, an orchestra is essentially a collection of highly refined, culturally sanctioned machines designed to produce clean, stable pitches that slot neatly into the Western harmonic system.
Right. An oboe is engineered to sound like an oboe.
Exactly. But what about the crackle of burning wood? Or the heavy, rhythmic thud of industrial machinery? Or the complex, shifting harmonics of a spinning metal lid?
You can't write that on sheet music.
You can't. These are incredibly rich acoustic events, but they cannot be played by a cello and they cannot be quantified on a musical staff. So Schaeffer proposed that composition should start with the concrete reality of existing sounds and then build outward into a musical structure.
Rather than starting with an abstract structure and filtering it down through a closed system of instruments?
Exactly. Start with the concrete matter.
And this theory culminated in a completely historic radio broadcast in 1948. He titled it The Concert of Noises.
And it was just as wild as it sounds.
He broadcast original compositions constructed entirely out of recorded environmental sounds. He used the sounds of train steam whistles, the clattering of spinning saucepan lids, whistling toy tops.
Chugging of canal boats along the Seine.
Yeah, and various percussive impacts on wood and metal. And he named this practice music concrete because the musical material was concrete and pre-existing, not abstractly generated.
I mean, put yourself in the position of a Parisian radio listener tuning in that evening.
I'd be terrified.
Right. It would have been a profoundly disorienting, even shocking experience. The sheer density and unfamiliarity of those soundscapes, It defied every convention of broadcasting.
And what is perhaps even more remarkable to me than the conceptual leap is the grueling technical reality of how he actually achieved it.
Oh, the tech is fascinating.
Today, we take audio manipulation completely for granted. You drag a waveform on a screen and stretch with a mouse, boom, done.
Seconds.
But in 1948, the RTF studio did not yet have magnetic tape recorders. Schaeffer was composing music concrete using phonograph discs. Vinyl.
He was physically cutting and manipulating vinyl records in real time. The physical logistics of using turntables as composition tools in 1948 are just staggering.
He utilized a technique called closed grooves or locked grooves.
How does that work exactly?
So on a normal record, the groove is a continuous spiral, right? It guides the needle slowly toward the center of the disc. But Schaeffer would use a disc cutting lathe to cut a groove that was a perfect closed circle.
Oh, wow. So it never moves inward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The heavy tone arm would drop and the needle would just endlessly track that single circular groove, playing the exact same fraction of a second of sound over and over again.
He essentially invented the audio loop using physical vinyl.
He really did.
Mm.
The locked groove was a massive revelation, but the execution was perilous. He would have multiple turntables running simultaneously in the studio.
Like a DJ setup. Like a crazy DJ setup. One turntable playing a locked groove of a train chugging, another playing a spinning saucepan lid, another playing a vocal fragment. And he had to manually manipulate the speeds of these heavy direct drive platters.
So he's physically mixing these discrete looping noise elements live.
Live on the air, it was an incredibly fragile, high-stress performance of engineering.
It's the ultimate precursor to the hip-hop DJ.
Yeah.
But the process was so labor-intensive and so prone to physical failure that it severely limited his structural ambitions. You could only do so much with 4 turntables.
Right. The real paradigm shift in his workflow happened a couple of years later when the studio finally acquired magnetic tape recorders.
Tape changed everything.
Completely altered his relationship with sound, because tape took something temporal, a fleeting acoustic event in time, and turned it into something spatial and measurable.
Let's break that down, because magnetic tape was the true catalyst for the modern studio era. Tape consists of a thin plastic strip coated with iron oxide powder. When a sound wave is converted into an electrical signal by a microphone, an electromagnet in the tape machine arranges those microscopic magnetic particles into a physical pattern that perfectly mimics the sound wave.
It's a physical imprint of sound.
Exactly. So suddenly, an abstract concept like duration became a physical length you could measure with a literal ruler.
Right. If the tape is moving at 15 inches per second, then 15 inches of tape equals exactly 1 second of sound.
As the artist Brian Eno pointed out decades later, tape made sound malleable, mutable, and cutable. You could literally take a razor blade and a splicing block, slice out a physical inch of tape containing the sharp attack of a piano note.
Just physically chop it off.
Yeah, chop it off and tape it directly to 3 inches of tape containing the ambient decay of a cymbal crash. You are creating a Frankenstein acoustic event that has never existed and could never exist in the natural world.
Schaeffer's methodology transformed completely. It went from the live, chaotic juggling of turntables to a highly precise, microscopic organization of sound. It resembled cinematic film editing. He was using montage.
But before we delve into the deep philosophical architecture he built around this editing process, we should probably establish that while Schaeffer formalized the movement and built the theoretical vocabulary and coined the term musique concrète,
he wasn't the only one doing this.
Right. He was not the sole inventor of utilizing recorded sound for artistic purposes. The drive to manipulate recording technology was really a global awakening. The technology itself was suggesting new avenues to anyone who got their hands on it.
Yeah, that's a really important point. For instance, in 1944, a full 4 years before Schaeffer's Concert of Noises, an Egyptian composer named Halim El-Dab composed a piece called The Expression of Czar in Cairo.
Oh, wow. In 1944.
Yeah. He took a heavy, cumbersome wire recorder, which was an early precursor to magnetic tape that used a spool of thin steel wire, and he took it out into the streets to record a local healing ceremony. He then manipulated the recordings of the chanting and the percussion using the limited speed controls and acoustic isolation of the radio station in Cairo. So the realization that the recording medium was itself an instrument was bubbling up independently all over the place.
But Schaeffer is the one who recognized that this new practice required an entirely new set of laws. the laws of traditional music just no longer applied.
Right. Because when a composer stops dealing with notes on a staff and starts physically severing pieces of magnetic tape, the fundamental atomic unit of the composition changes entirely.
You're no longer manipulating a C sharp.
No, you are manipulating what Schaeffer defined as the objet sonore, the sound object.
And defining the objet sonore is where Schaeffer's work transitions from, like clever engineering, into heavy, groundbreaking philosophy. He defined the sound object as the smallest self-contained particle of a soundscape.
But the crucial conceptual leap is how that particle is evaluated by the listener and the composer.
Because in classical music, a sound is evaluated primarily by its pitch, right? Is it an A or a B flat? Does it fit into the chord progression?
Exactly. But Schaeffer argued that a sound object must be stripped of its traditional musical value, and instead evaluated strictly on its internal acoustic architecture. You are listening to its grain, its mass, its dynamic envelope, its harmonic spectrum.
Okay, this sounds super abstract. Let's ground this in reality for you listening. What exactly is a sound object?
To grasp the concept of the objet sonore, it's actually often more effective to define it by what it is not.
Okay, what is it not?
First, the sound object is absolutely not the physical instrument or the physical event that created the sound.
So if I drop a heavy piece of sheet metal onto concrete,
The physical action of dropping it and the metal itself, those are irrelevant to the sound object. Schaeffer demanded that you separate the acoustic result from the causal action.
okay, what else is it not?
Second, the sound object is not the physical medium it is recorded on. It is not the vinyl record, and it is not the strip of iron oxide tape.
Oh, because the physical tape doesn't equal one sound.
Right. Schaeffer noted that a few centimeters of tape might contain 5 distinct rapid sound objects, or a single sustaining sound object might stretch across several meters of tape.
So if the sound object isn't the sheet metal, and it isn't the plastic tape on the reel, it exists purely in the realm of human perception.
Yes. It's the sonic event as it is isolated and perceived by the conscious mind.
Let's dig into what Schaeffer meant by the acoustic architecture of these objects.
Yeah.
When we talk about mass or grain, we are really talking about the physics of sound waves.
Exactly, because traditional instruments are designed to produce harmonic spectrums. When you pluck a guitar string, it vibrates at a fundamental frequency, say 440 hertz.
Right, an A note.
But it also vibrates in halves, thirds, and quarters, producing a neat, mathematically related ladder of overtones. It sounds clean to our ears.
It makes sense to us mathematically.
But music concrete thrives on inharmonic spectrums. A spinning saucepan lid does not vibrate in neat mathematical fractions. It vibrates chaotically, producing a dense cluster of totally unrelated frequencies.
And Schaeffer called this density its mass.
Yes, the mass. And the grain refers to the microfluctuations in the sound over time, like the roughness or smoothness of the texture. And the envelope is the trajectory of the sound, how quickly it attacks, how long it sustains, and how it decays.
Schaeffer wanted composers to organize these complex inharmonic objects based on their mass and grain, rather than their pitch. But the moment he put this theory to the test, he slammed into a massive psychological wall.
Oh, a huge wall.
Which brings us to his very first major composition, the Etude au chemin de fer, or the train station study.
Right.
He went to a rail yard in Paris, recorded the massive steam engines, the screeching wheels, the rhythmic chugging, and the whistles. He brought all these recordings back, manipulated them, and assembled them into a composition. And almost immediately, he deemed the piece a complete failure.
He rejected his own work because he realized the audience was fundamentally incapable of hearing the objet sonore.
Why? What did they hear?
When people listened to the train station study, they didn't appreciate the dense, inharmonic mass of the steam release or the rhythmic envelope of the wheels. They just heard trains.
Right, they just pictured a train.
The referential weight of the recording completely overpowered the abstract acoustic qualities. Listeners were visualizing the rail yard. The sounds were just too anchored to their physical source.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Schaeffer found himself trapped in a profound paradox. The entire premise of his movement was to abandon traditional instruments and utilize concrete, real-world noises.
Yeah.
But the second he captured those real-world noises, he desperately needed them to lose all their real-world context so they could function as pure sonic building blocks.
He needed the dirt and the complexity of the real world, but he needed it completely sanitized of its history and its identity.
Resolving this paradox became the central focus of his entire methodology. How do you force a listener to stop imagining a train when you literally play them the sound of a train?
Schaeffer found the answer in the physical manipulation of the medium. In his foundational text, Solfège de l'objet sonore, which translates to the music theory of the sonic object, he wrote this really defining principle. Variation is a technique for revealing essence.
Let's look at how that physical variation actually works. If you have a recording of a train whistle on magnetic tape, its identity is clear. Everyone knows it's a whistle. But if you play that tape at double the speed, the physics of the sound change entirely.
The frequency doubles, which raises the pitch an octave, but the duration is cut in half.
Right, so the heavy resonant blast of the whistle suddenly becomes this sharp, high-frequency chirp.
And if you play the tape in reverse, the natural acoustic envelope is destroyed. A percussive sound with a sharp attack and a long decay becomes a sound that slowly swells out of nowhere and then abruptly stops.
And by employing these variations, speeding it up, slowing it down, reversing it, or literally chapping off the very first transient attack of the sound, the worldly identity of the recording just shatters.
The brain can no longer connect the incoming acoustic data to the physical image of a train. The reference dissolves.
And once that worldly identity is stripped away, the true sonic essence, the raw objet sonore, is finally exposed and available for musical organization.
The tape machine basically acts as a chemical solvent, burning away the physical origin to reveal the pure acoustic geometry underneath.
So the composer has now successfully isolated and purified the sound object. But Schaeffer realized that if the audience was going to comprehend this entirely new reality of pure sound, they needed an entirely new framework for perception.
Or rather, they needed to resurrect an incredibly ancient framework. He recognized that to consume the objet sonore, the listener had to engage in a specific, highly disciplined form of hearing.
Right. To define this necessary mode of perception, Schaeffer turned to ancient Greek philosophy. He revived the term acousmatic.
And the history behind this term is just fascinating.
Oh, it's so good. It originates with the acousmatikoi, the devoted disciples of the ancient philosopher Pythagoras. The historical accounts tell us that for the first 5 years of their initiation, Pythagoras would deliver his complex mathematical and philosophical lectures to his students while hidden behind a physical curtain.
Yep, behind a curtain.
The students were required to sit in absolute silence and listen to his voice without ever seeing his face or his body.
I mean, it seems highly theatrical, right? But Pythagoras understood a really fundamental truth about human cognition. By completely obscuring his physical form, his hand gestures, and his facial expressions, he was intentionally starving the student's visual cortex.
Because human beings are deeply visually biased.
Deeply. Our visual processing systems demand a massive amount of our brain's bandwidth. By removing the visual data, Pythagoras forced his students to reallocate all of their cognitive processing power exclusively to the pure, abstract message of his words.
The visual bias is something we deal with constantly, especially in music. We have the idiom, seeing is believing for a reason. Vision dominates our reality. When you watch a symphony orchestra perform, your eyes are feeding your brain an incredibly compelling story.
Oh, yeah. You see the intense concentration on the cellist's face.
The physical exertion of the percussionist. The synchronized swaying of the violin section.
That visual narrative is so strong that it actively colors and overrides your objective hearing of the acoustic vibrations. Your hearing is being led and sometimes completely fooled by your vision.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Schaeffer looked at this ancient Pythagorean practice and realized that the late 19th and 20th centuries had accidentally constructed a permanent global curtain.
He identified the radio, the phonograph, and the loudspeaker as the modern Pythagorean curtain.
It is a stunning realization when you consider the entirety of human history. For hundreds of thousands of years, up until the invention of the phonograph by Edison and the gramophone by Berliner, sound and sight were inextricably biologically linked.
They were always together.
Always. If you heard a human voice, there was a physical human body within your line of sight, or at least within earshot, generating that voice. If you heard a drum, a physical hand was striking a physical skin in your immediate vicinity. Sound was deeply tied to the physical mechanism that produced it. It occurred in one specific place at one specific time, and then it was gone forever.
And the advent of recording technology ruptured that reality permanently. The acoustic ecologist R. Murray Schaeffer later coined a brilliant term for this: schizophonia.
Schizophonia.
Yeah, it derives from the Greek prefix schizo, meaning split or separated, and phonia, meaning sound. Schizophonia describes the fracturing of an original sound from its electroacoustical transmission. Recording technology just tore sounds from their natural sockets.
Suddenly, a voice was no longer tied to the biology of a throat. A performance could be captured, amplified, and blasted out of millions of vibrating paper cones across the globe simultaneously, completely severed from its visual cause.
It's a total paradigm shift for the human brain.
The great way to conceptualize this is to imagine eating a complex, multi-course meal while securely blindfolded. In a normal setting, when a chef places a plate in front of you, your eyes immediately analyze the meal.
You see the sear on the meat.
You see the vibrant colors of the reduction sauce, and your brain instantly preloads the expected flavors. The visual data dictates the culinary experience before the food even touches your tongue.
But the moment you are blindfolded,
Your brain is deprived of that predictive visual scaffolding. It goes into a state of hyper-awareness. It reallocates all of its energy to the olfactory nerves and the taste buds. Suddenly, you're detecting micro layers of acidity, subtle hints of smoke, and complex textural differences that your visual bias would have completely paved over.
and Schaeffer argued that the loudspeaker acts as a blindfold for our ears. Because the speaker cone hides the train, the saucepan, and the violin, our brain is forced to dedicate its full analytical power to the complex frequencies and microscopic textures of the sound itself.
The blindfold forces a heightened state of material awareness. But Schaeffer, ever the rigorous theorist, knew that simply placing the listener behind the loudspeaker wasn't enough to guarantee they would perceive the objet sonore.
No, because the biological conditioning is just so deep, even a blindfolded listener will automatically try to guess what is making the noise.
Right. What am I eating? What am I hearing?
Exactly. So Schaeffer developed an incredibly stringent psychological framework to train the mind. He called this practice reduced listening, or l'écoute réduite.
To truly grasp the discipline of reduced listening, we have to look at how Schaeffer meticulously categorized the human auditory experience into 4 distinct modes. He broke down exactly how our brains process incoming acoustic data, and by comparing these 4 modes, we can see exactly what he was trying to achieve.
The taxonomy he created is highly precise. The first mode he identified is écouter. This is the most primal, survival-driven mode. This is listening with the explicit goal of identifying the physical source or the cause of the sound.
Like trying to figure out what made the noise.
Exactly. You hear a low rumble, and your brain deduces that is a diesel engine. You hear a sharp crack, and you think that is a branch breaking. In this mode, you are not really listening to the sound. You are listening through the sound to diagnose the physical reality behind it. The sound is merely a clue to the physical world.
Its sound is forensics.
Right. The second mode is weir. This translates to passive, indiscriminate hearing. It is the absolute lowest level of cognitive engagement.
Give me an example of that.
Imagine you are sitting on a park bench reading a book. There's the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, maybe a fountain splashing. You are biologically receiving the vibrations, your eardrums are moving, but your conscious mind is not processing them. The sound is just washing over you without any intentional discrimination or analysis.
The third mode is entendre.
Yes. And this is where we approach Schaeffer's ideal state. Entendre requires active, qualitative listening. You are no longer trying to identify the source, nor are you passively ignoring it. You are intentionally focusing on the specific acoustic characteristics of the sound.
You are analyzing its pitch, its dynamic envelope, its roughness, its harmonic density.
Exactly. You notice the rapid decay of a metallic strike, or the slow, evolving modulation of a drone. You are treating the sound as an aesthetic object in itself.
And the final mode is comprendre. This involves listening to extract semantic, linguistic, or symbolic meaning.
It is exactly what you are doing as you listen to my voice right now.
Right. You are not analyzing the fundamental frequency of my vocal cords, nor are you picturing the biological shape of my larynx. You are treating the acoustic vibrations purely as a delivery vehicle for language. You extract the abstract meaning of the words and immediately discard the sonic vehicle that carried them.
So we have these 4 distinct avenues. Treating sound as a physical clue, écouter, passive reception, weir, analyzing sonic qualities, entendre, and extracting symbolic meaning, comprendre. Schaeffer's revolutionary practice of reduced listening, l'écoute réduite, is the conscious, highly disciplined effort to completely eliminate the first and fourth modes.
It requires a ruthless mental bracketing. When you hear a recording of a dog barking, you must actively suppress the primal urge to identify the dog. You must also suppress any urge to extract a communicative message, like wondering if the dog is angry or scared.
You must force your brain entirely into the third mode. You train yourself to think. That is a series of rapid, high-amplitude, wide-band noise bursts with steep attack transients. You have to treat the sound as an alien artifact devoid of history, origin, and meaning.
What's fascinating here is the direct, explicit philosophical lineage Schaeffer is drawing upon. He didn't invent this concept out of thin air.
No, he borrowed heavily from the phenomenological philosophy of Edmund Husserl. Husserl developed a concept called the epiché, or phenomenological reduction.
How does that connect to sound?
Well, Husserl argued that humans move through life with a natural attitude. We just assume the objective world exists exactly as we perceive it. To truly understand the essence of our conscious experience, Husserl said we must bracket off or suspend our belief in the external world. We must stop asking, what caused this, or is this real, and focus purely on the phenomenon exactly as it presents itself to our consciousness.
So Schaeffer essentially took Husserl's phenomenological epiche and applied it directly to the human eardrum.
He is demanding that the listener become an active phenomenologist of sound.
The intellectual rigor of that is stunning, but I have to interject here because this is where the theory rubs up violently against human biology. Schaeffer is asking the listener to fight millions of years of evolutionary hardwiring. Is this actually biologically possible for a human being to sustain?
It's a huge ask.
Right. We evolved to use our hearing as a 360-degree, 247 survival radar. If early hominids in the forest heard a snapping twig and decided to engage in Husserlian reduced listening to analyze the high-frequency acoustic envelope of the snap, they were eaten by a tiger.
The tiger always wins.
Our brains are relentlessly wired to treat sound as a diagnostic tool for physical threats. If you play a listener a recording of a screeching car tire or a human scream, the biological imperative to understand the threat is going to override their desire to appreciate its sonic texture. Doesn't the tiger always win?
That is the ultimate friction at the heart of music concrete, and Schaeffer was acutely aware of it. He fully recognized that the survival instinct, the écouteur mode, is a massive, nearly impenetrable biological wall.
So how did he get around it?
His solution to that biological wall brings us right back to the very first tool he utilized in his 1948 turntable experiments: the loop.
The locked groove on the vinyl record.
Yes. Schaeffer discovered that a single, isolated presentation of a sound will almost always trigger the biological survival instinct. The brain demands a causal explanation. But if you take that exact physical signal, the recording of the snapping twig or the train whistle or the metallic clatter, and you repeat it perfectly, identically, over and over and over again through a loudspeaker, a profound psychological shift occurs.
Oh, I see where you were going. The repetition exhausts the instinct.
Exactly. The first time the brain hears the twig snap, it flares up, "Danger? What's that?" The second time, it registers twig snapping again. But by the 20th, the 50th, the 100th perfect repetition, the brain's threat assessment software realizes that there is no tiger.
The acoustic event is not tethered to a progressing physical reality.
The survival instinct is neutralized by the sheer predictability of the loop. And once that biological curiosity is thoroughly exhausted and put to sleep, the sonorous object, the raw texture, the internal rhythm, the complex harmonic mass finally steps out from behind the shadow of its physical cause and becomes the primary focus of perception. The loop is the technological hack that short-circuits the biological defense system.
That is a brilliant psychological mechanism. The loop strips the urgency from the physical world and transforms reality into structure. But when we look at the totality of this project, the profound philosophy of the objet sonore, the resurrection of Pythagorean achismatics, the rigorous discipline of reduced listening, we have to ask, did it actually work?
That's the million-dollar question.
Did Schaeffer succeed in creating a new musical utopia of pure sound objects? This is where the narrative takes a deeply ironic, almost tragic turn. Because by the end of his life, Schaeffer felt that he had failed completely.
It is one of the great historical ironies of modern art. Despite the monumental theoretical architecture he constructed, listeners, and ultimately Schaeffer himself, could never fully suppress the gravity of the real world. The referential weight of the sounds was simply too stubborn.
They just couldn't shake the original image.
He found that listeners were always, on some level, hearing the trains, the saucepans, and the footsteps, no matter how much tape manipulation he applied.
He became incredibly disillusioned. He eventually joked, with a heavy dose of bitterness, that his entire body of work shouldn't be called music concrete, but rather music anecdotique, anecdotal music.
Because the sounds stubbornly maintained a psychic connection to the specific real-world situations in which they were recorded.
Right, they function as little sonic anecdotes. He began referring to his compositions as son mémorisé, memorized or stored sound. He felt he had merely created a vast, abstract library of sonic memories, rather than a pure, new musical language capable of replacing traditional harmonic structures.
In interviews later in his life, he expressed a profound regret, suggesting he had wasted his career searching for a phantom.
He judged his life's work against an impossibly strict metric, the absolute severance of sound from its worldly origins. Because he couldn't achieve total phenomenological purity, he declared the project a failure.
But his self-assessment was completely blind to the actual seismic legacy of his experiments. He may have failed to create a sterile vacuum of pure sound objects, but in the muddy, chaotic process of trying, he accidentally wrote the blueprint for the entire future of popular music production.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? How do we bridge the gap between a frustrated radio engineer cutting tape in 1948 and the music dominating Spotify right now?
The lineage is a direct, unbroken line. Schaeffer's piecemeal techniques, the isolation, manipulation, looping, and structural reorganization of recorded audio fragments, provided the technical and conceptual foundation for the explosion of studio experimentation in the 1960s.
Right, think about the Beatles.
Exactly. When you listen to the swirling backward tape loops and chopped-up orchestral fragments on the Beatles' Revolver, orchestrated by George Martin, you are listening to direct applications of music concrete.
Or Pink Floyd. When they construct the rhythmic foundation of the song Money out of a tape loop of clinking coins and cash registers, that is pure Schaeffer.
Pierre Schaeffer. But the legacy expands exponentially when we move into the digital era and the birth of modern sampling cultures. To truly understand the scale of Schaeffer's influence, we really have to look at how his concepts compare to the other major electronic music movement of the mid-20th century.
Because while Schaeffer was in Paris physically cutting up tape of trains and saucepans, a massive rival studio emerged in Cologne, Germany, spearheaded by composers like Karlheinz Stockhausen and Herbert Eimert.
This rivalry between the Paris school and the Cologne school is the foundational schism of all electronic music.
It is the difference between sampling and synthesis.
Exactly. The Cologne school, operating under the banner of electronic music, took the exact opposite approach to Schaeffer. They looked at Schaeffer's concrete recordings and viewed them as hopelessly dirty, chaotic, and contaminated by the real world.
They hated the real-world samples.
They believed that to create truly revolutionary music, you couldn't rely on the messy acoustics of the physical universe. You had to synthesize sound from the subatomic level up.
They relied entirely on pure electronics. They used massive oscillators and tone generators to create mathematically perfect sine waves.
A sine wave is a pure tone with absolutely no overtones or harmonics. It literally does not exist in the natural world.
Right. And Stockhausen would painstakingly build complex timbres by layering these synthesized sine waves on top of each other, calculating the exact mathematical ratios of the frequencies.
It was a highly sterile, deeply theoretical, and mathematically precise approach additive synthesis. It was the absolute antithesis to Schaeffer's subtractive manipulation of the noisy, concrete world.
The Cologne school wanted to play God, creating new acoustic realities from scratch. Schaeffer wanted to be the alchemist, transmuting the dirt of the existing world into gold.
But what is so beautiful about the trajectory of music technology is that today, the modern producer does not have to choose a side in that ideological war. The modern digital audio workstation programs like Ableton Live, Logic, or Pro Tools is the ultimate synthesis of both Paris and Cologne.
Think about it. If you look at a modern producer session on a computer screen, you will see a track containing a purely synthesized, mathematically perfect sub-bass sine wave generated by a software oscillator, the ultimate dream of the Cologne school.
Yeah.
And directly below it, on the very next track, you will see a chopped-up, pitch-shifted reverse snippet of a 1970s soul vocal pulled from a dusty vinyl record, the ultimate manifestation of Schaeffer's objet sonore. The DIW brings the sterile math of synthesis and the dirty anecdotal reality of sampling together onto a single digital grid.
And it is within that sampling culture that Schaeffer's concept of reduced listening found its most profound application. Consider the entire architecture of hip-hop and drum and bass. Producers in the 1980s and 90s would take a brief drum solo, a break from an old funk record, sample it, loop it, and build entirely new tracks on top of it.
The ultimate example of this is the Amen break.
Oh, without a doubt.
In 1969, a funk and soul group called the Winstons released a B-side track called Amen Brother. In the middle of the song, there is a 4-bar drum solo played by Gregory Sylvester Coleman. It lasts about 6 seconds.
6 seconds.
Decades later, early hip-hop and jungle producers sampled those exact 6 seconds. They didn't sample it because they cared about the Winstons, or the year 1969, or the original chord progression. They stripped the physical recording of its history and its semantic meaning.
They listened to it purely in Schaeffer's third mode entendre. They heard the specific acoustic grain of the snare drum, the rhythmic envelope of the kick, the mass of the ride cymbal.
They isolated that break, put it into a sampler, sliced it into microfragments, rearranged the transients, pitch shifted it, and looped it endlessly. They turned a 1969 drum performance into a pure objet sonore. That specific 6-second sound object became the foundational rhythmic architecture for thousands of songs across multiple genres.
There is a quote in our research from Drew Daniel, who is one half of the electronic duo Matmos. Matmos is famous for constructing highly complex rhythmic tracks entirely out of the sounds of washing machines or like surgical procedures.
Which is very Schaeffer.
Very. And Daniel makes a definitive overarching claim about this legacy. He argues that basically all contemporary popular music is, at its core, music concrete.
It is a sweeping claim, but it's analytically sound. Whether a modern producer is digitally sampling an old vinyl record, pulling a massive kick drum sample from a digital library, or recording a door slamming to layer under a snare drum, the fundamental philosophy is identical to Schaeffer's.
The sound is digitized, completely severed from its physical source, manipulated on a visual timeline, and evaluated strictly for its acoustic utility within the mix. Popular music is constructed piece by piece from isolated sound objects.
Schaeffer thought he failed because he couldn't completely erase the ghost of the real world from his recordings. But the generations of producers who followed him discovered something he totally missed. The tension between the abstract sound object and its physical origin is exactly what makes sample-based music so emotionally resonant.
That tension is everything.
When we listen to a hip-hop beat, we are physically moved by the abstract geometry of the rhythm, but subconsciously we are also reacting to the sun memories, the stored memory of the vinyl crackle, the room tone of the 1970s studio, the ghost of the original drummer vibrating underneath the electronic manipulation. The failure of absolute purity became the defining aesthetic of modern music.
It serves as a powerful reminder that technological tools inevitably reshape human perception, and that an artist's ultimate contribution to culture is often radically different from their original intention. Pierre Schaeffer failed to create a pure language of abstract sound, but in his failure, he provided us with the necessary vocabulary and the philosophical framework to navigate the hypermediated, sound-saturated reality we live in today.
We have covered massive ground here. We started with a radio engineer in a post-war Parisian studio fighting the mathematical prison of 12-tone music by physically locking the grooves of vinyl records. We navigated the dense physics of the objet sonore, exploring how speed and variation melt away the physical identity of a sound.
It's been quite a journey.
We traveled back to ancient Greece to understand how Pythagoras used a curtain to force his students to listen, and how the modern loudspeaker acts as a global blindfold, plunging us into a state of schizophrenia. We broke down the 4 modes of human hearing and saw how the simple act of looping a sound can exhaust our biological survival instincts, forcing us into a state of reduced listening.
And finally, we saw how the tension between the pristine synthesis of the Cologne school and the dirty sampling of the Paris school birthed the modern digital workstation.
If we project Schaeffer's theories into the immediate future, we arrive at a final provocative thought regarding the evolution of the objet sonore. Schaeffer's primary struggle was with the referential weight of reality. He couldn't make a recorded train stop sounding like a train. But today, with the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence and voice cloning, we have inverted Schaeffer's problem entirely.
Oh, this is the scariest part.
We no longer struggle to strip reality from a recording. We are now generating recordings that possess the precise acoustic mass, grain, and envelope of reality, but have absolutely no physical origin. When an AI flawlessly generates the voice of a loved one saying something they never actually said, it creates the ultimate, terrifying objet sonore.
It is a pure, synthetic acoustic object that perfectly mimics the biological markers of human truth.
If Schaeffer's tape machines separated the sound from the physical body, AI has learned how to synthesize the ghost itself. As we move into an era where our ears can no longer be trusted as diagnostic tools for physical reality, we may find that Schaeffer's discipline of reduced listening, Evaluating sound strictly as an acoustic phenomena, divorced from its assumed cause, is no longer just an avant-garde musical technique, but a necessary psychological defense mechanism for the 21st century.
That is something to think about.
Next time you hear a dog bark outside your window, try to listen to the shape of the frequency just for a second before the image of the animal takes over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your ears open and your curiosity sharp.